When you're coming into this business, you want to do something that people before you have done. You really need to listen and learn, because people like me want to pass it down. I feel like that's my responsibility. And if those people listen and observe, ask questions, but be resourceful and just be present, you're going to learn.
Julia, thank you so much for coming by, because we have this vehicle of interviews that we produce and put together for anybody that's involved in the music industry to look at the industry and see all the opportunities that are there that they may never have known existed. And although we've had many famous artists and different people from all the entertainment, lawyers and agents and composers, you have a real interesting position of what you do in the music industry that is extremely exciting and very informative. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, my pleasure.
Tell me about, in the beginning, was there music in your life that kind of got you involved with music that eventually led to this insanity that you're doing now?
Yes, total insanity. Well, of course, I think that's why we're all here. I was that girl in the 70s and the 80s that, you know, looked at every liner note on her albums. I laid in front of my speakers that were this high and read every word on every album. I wanted to know who wrote the songs. I wanted to know who played on the songs. I wanted to know who produced the songs. Like, I just couldn't consume enough music. And my kind of music at that was like funky, kind of Kool and the Gang and the Jackson 5 and the Daz Band and the Gap Band and Stevie Wonder. I was really into like funk and soul and that kind of music. But to answer your question, yes, I just couldn't consume enough music, and it was always around. Every time we were doing something with my friends, I would have a song for something. I'd have a song for this road trip, I'd have a song for this dance at school, I'd have a song for this, and not till later in my life did my friends remind me of that, but I started doing it very early.
That really is amazing. I mean, fate was speaking loud and clear at that time.
Yes, it was just something that felt natural that I was doing. I was putting music to everything I did in my life.
How incredible. And really, that's kind of what you do now, but let's work from there. So now you go to school, you're leading towards music at all, or?
No. So I was a competitive gymnast, competed for about 10, 11 years in gymnastics. I was also a cheerleader. I worked for a company called the National Cheerleaders Association. I taught cheerleading camps all over the country. And I used to cut my own music. So it was cassette to cassette at that time. So I would, first beat of music, lift it up on the, the 8 count. So I was doing that myself, ready for all my cheerleading competitions and things like that. But I went to Indiana University. I'm from Chicago, and I majored in sports science. So I thought I'd be an athletic trainer, or I thought I would be an exercise physiologist. I was kind of following the sports way. But because I was a gymnast, when I got out of college, I worked for USA Gymnastics. And I worked in Indianapolis in the Pan Am Plaza. And I was the production coordinator for the Gymnastics Federation. It was USGF at the time, it's USA Gymnastics now. I was in charge of all the production on all the competitions you see on television. So every international and national event, from the World Championships to the Pan Am Games to USA Championships, I was in charge of the arena. I basically made up the ceremonies, so I got to choose what songs I wanted to use. I got to edit my own music. I got to train the kids in each town we went to walk with their flags and do all of that. And I also played all the gymnast floor music. I played all the music during the competition, and I did it with cassettes. A little bit different today.
It
was probably the hardest job I ever did, because it was live television, and I was probably 22, 23. And so, I'd have my headset on, I'd have all my cassettes lined up on the side, and I'd have ESPN in one ear, I'd have Bella Crowley in my other ear, yelling at me to turn the music up, yelling at me to turn the music down. So I didn't know, but it was kind of the start of my music career, where I was managing a lot of chaos. It was really stressful, but that's sort of where I think honed my skills about how to stay calm in certain situations. And I had a great mentor at the Gymnastics Federation, or USA Gymnastics, who really kind of taught me how to survive in an environment like that. And after a while, I became very good at it, and I was had been there a couple years, and I thought, I don't really want to live in Indianapolis my whole life. I think I have to leave. So, not to get too far ahead, but that's sort of after that career, which was such a grounding experience for me. laid the groundwork for me to sort of do what I do now, I decided to leave.
So let's go back to with cassettes, and I want everyone to understand. Having to develop the skill of using these cassette tapes, you had to pop in, eject, put
Let me be real specific, because I can tell you, it was crazy.
Yeah.
So in international competition, you play a ding-dong, you march to your next event. You play a march. Then you play a song for warm-ups. Then you play a ding-dong, end of warm-ups.
What's a ding-dong?
Like a ding-ding, like,
Just
you know,
little
basically a sound,
Okay.
kind of a sound. Because it's international, so you do this so everyone knows what's going on. Then the competition starts and you play the floor music or you play background music. During all this, I had a cassette for every ding-dong, every floor routine, every march, every national anthem. And the way I would cue my music is put my headphones on, listen, first beat of music, stop the cassette, pull the cassette out, one finger turn, Sharpie marker. Line it up next to me. And I was always like so nervous, because the worst thing you can do is start a floor routine in the middle of some national competition or international competition and have Bella or some international, yell at you. So I was always checking my Sharpie markers, and it was old school. I mean, it was, it was 1989. It was a crazy situation. Now I think about it. I went to the national championships at UCLA recently, and now it's not even a USA Gymnastics personnel that does it. They're like professionals that come in with their mixing boards, and everything's digital, and it's way easier. But that's how I learned, and that's what I did.
Well, that's not really old school. That is old school.
Yes, very old school. And that's how we did it. That somebody taught me how to do that. So I did what someone taught me.
But you were developing a skill base that was really an important quality that you use now.
Correct. Like I said, how to operate in chaos, how to stay calm, and how to manage a lot of people. I was in charge of that arena, where the equipment went, what music was played, who was doing what, make sure all the flags were there, and all the national anthems. If we had a competition with 50 countries, there had to be a national anthem for every single country. What if somebody won an event? I had to have it on hand. So it was a lot of preparation.
How did you file all these cassettes?
I had storage facilities.
Well, that's a lot of cassettes.
Oh yeah. The girls would bring their music to me at the beginning, but then I had a massive collection of certain marches and things like that. And I had a storage facility off-site of where the office was. So we would go to the facility, load everything up for a competition, put it on the airplane. It sounds crazy now. Go to the city, unpack it all, bring it all to the arena, set it up. Sometimes competitions were 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Pack it back up, ship it back home, and then I was in charge of putting it all back. So you had to be young to do that job, because it was a lot of energy.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So now you move out and you come to LA?
At that point, I was kind of done with that job, and I thought, I want to get in the music business. I didn't really know what the music business meant at the time. I thought it was records, and I also, this is my big reveal, I wanted to dance in music videos. So I wanted to dance with Paula Abdul and Janet Jackson and Michael Jackson. I just thought, I'm young enough, I'm going to go out there and try to do that and kind of find my way in the music business. So I packed up my Toyota Tercel, asked my best guy friend that I knew from college, and we drove to LA. So I literally came here with no experience except, the gymnastic world. And I had some friends here, moved in with them from college. One girl was a cheerleader with me, one was a gymnast. And sort of kind of stumbled and was finding my way, and I was dancing and going on auditions, and then I fractured my foot, which I had fractured before. And I thought, okay, this is it. I'm getting old. I need to think about a real job. That's kind of where my head clicked to being a performer, to finding some kind of job that I could sustain and actually pay my bills.
How old are you at this time?
I was 24.
Okay, so you're young enough. So now you come into this realization.
Yep.
What happened next?
So I don't know if they still have these agencies, but they used to have agencies that only placed you in entertainment. They were these temp agencies. And I kept going to this one particular temp agency and asking them to place me. And one day they said, they just picked up the sheet and go, here, just go on this interview. And I said, fine. So I go on this interview, and turns out the interview was with a company called the Kraft Benjamin Agency. Richard Kraft and Lynn Benjamin. And Richard is still one of the biggest film composer agents working today. There's 2 big agencies. Now the agency is Kraft Engel. It's Richard Kraft and Laura Engel. And I interviewed for the job. I didn't get the job. I didn't get the job because I had no experience. and all it said was like aerobics instructor, cheerleader. And so Richard didn't hire me, and I was devastated because I needed a job. And it turned out that the girl they hired kind of went a little crazy and erased Richard's ATM cards, and so they called me in desperation and said, get that girl back. So I wound up starting as his assistant, and I worked there for 4 years. And I was an assistant to composer agents. And for me, which I always tell people that want to be music supervisors, it was so important to start in the business learning about how a film score is made.
Interesting.
How a composer writes, what happens on the scoring stage, what happens when you're programming synth versus orchestral. Like, I got all of that knowledge in 4 years working for Richard and Lynn at the time. And it was priceless for me, because most people come to Los Angeles or New York and say, oh, I have a really cool record collection, I want to be a music supervisor. Yeah. And I know we'll get there, but there's so much more to that than, meets the eye. So for me, it was priceless coming in an area which I had no knowledge of. I didn't pay attention to who wrote the score on films, nor did I pay attention to the music I was listening to. So I really got educated in that world.
So in those 4 years, you went through several different areas of learning. It wasn't just one particular job. So just talk about some of that, the difference between synth and live and sessions in studio.
We represented very big orchestral composers at the time. So Jerry Goldsmith and Elmer Bernstein and Mark Shaman and Danny Elfman, who's not all orchestral, and Howard Shore, John Barry.
These are the biggest.
The biggest. Yeah. So I got a very good education on how a film score is created, written, composed, and recorded. So just by being, I did work in the office. I was his assistant. I answered the phones, but I was the only one that had a computer. So I had a laptop. No one else had computers. I'm totally dating myself. But it's kind of interesting. So I kept track of all the movies. I kept track of, I read the Variety and the Reporter. Those are our main sources. Yeah. And I would log everything into a computer, and we'd have meetings about what's going on, who's making what movie. And then between Richard and Lynn, they would decide who was going to call who, what relationships they had, and who are they going to pitch. Being there also, I learned a really great lesson on how to make demo tapes or demo CDs. We got a recordable CD player one day, and everything changed. Richard taught me how to make a great composer demo tape, because sometimes if you don't know these big names and you're pitching younger composers, you get one shot, you get one demo reel for a producer or director to listen to, and that was invaluable information for me, because it's really important about how to put music together when you're trying to sell something or pitch something or get someone to see a point of view you're trying to express.
So you have a producer or a director that's there that you have to deliver this idea.
Correct.
One shot, fast.
Yeah, one shot. That's it. How many tracks are you going to put on that demo? Where are you going to pull from? What movie are they making? What has the composer done that's similar that you can pull from? Like, all of that knowledge was just a huge plethora of experience that was coming at me that I kind of learned by absorbing and then by doing. And then I got to go to the scoring sessions, which still are one of my favorite things in the business.
Talk about that. I've been to several of them. Just explain what that's like.
Seeing an orchestra, whether it's a 50-piece orchestra, a 100-piece orchestra, play the music live that you've only heard demos of it's breathtaking. It transports you. It's why film composing and movies, you have these experiences, because the music is such a big part of the experience of going to a film, and I mostly do films, so I'm only going to talk from that experience. I haven't done a lot of television. It's still one of the most magical times in the process that we all love to be there.
Absolutely, and to witness this creation happening. And listen, music plays an extremely important part in that movie to bring the life of that scene. So each area of that movie has to really be delivered well musically.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of demoing and notes before you get to the scoring stage, as you know, but when you get there and you can breathe a little bit that you're at this point where you're actually recording, and the musicians, of course, are like first-rate, best in the world.
World-class musicians that play.
Sight readers.
Absolutely.
There's they look at it for 5 minutes and then boom, they're recording on the downbeat. It's pretty impressive, yeah. So
as you're doing this here and you're working on certain, responsibility now, you were there for 4 years. Mm-hmm. Where did that lead you at that point now?
Well, my path goes like this, which is why I say it's really good to have a lot of different jobs. So we represented a composer named Basil Polydorus, who did The Hunt for Red October, Lonesome Dove, Conan the Barbarian, very famous, beautiful beautiful scores. And I left and went to his studio and became his studio manager. And I think he did Starship Troopers when I was there, but that was a big movie that we did. And I literally, I did everything from manage the studio to go get lunch during the day. Basil was the most loving man. He passed away from cancer years ago, but his family became my family. All his programmers, we all were very close, and it was sort of like the time I needed to sort of regroup and decide what I was going to do next, and he just took me in and managed his studio, got to be in all those sessions, got to do it from the composer side, not the agency side. The agency is nutty and constant motion and always something happening, and I got to like breathe a little bit when I worked for Basil and learn a little bit what happens in the studio when he's writing. He was very much pen to paper.
Old school.
Old school.
Yeah.
That was one of the highlights of what my career so far.
How beautiful.
Yeah.
How beautiful just to witness that.
Oh yeah.
So now, these responsibilities that you had now were changing from position to position.
Correct.
So you're widening your skill base.
Absolutely.
And so you're becoming even more valuable to the music industry because of all this knowledge that you have.
Absolutely.
Which you could not learn in any university on this planet.
Never.
You had to be
in the room.
In
the room.
thick of it.
Yes.
But it seemed like I used it's almost like you had like a jungle in front of you and a machete.
Yes.
It's like there was really no path. You had to kind of pave that path for yourself
Yes.
to learn this stuff, and you had to learn it fast.
Yes, and you say yes, and then you don't know what you're doing, and you figure it out. That's one of my always my panel talks, my panel points. Just say yes, and then call everybody you know and try to figure it out.
But that takes a real level of confidence
Yes.
and trust in yourself.
And drive.
And we'll talk about that later on.
Yes.
I want to get into your drive. You've got a special drive. So at this point now, where'd you go from that point?
So at that point, I was working at Basil's studio. I picked up the phone one day, and it was a call from Capitol Records. And it was a girl that I kind of knew, but she had heard about me, and she said, we had a director of soundtracks here. She just left. We have a first look deal with Miramax. We need someone to come in and do the Scream 2 soundtrack. Can you do it? I was like, sure. Never done a soundtrack in my life, except for what I'd done for Basil, which was score. Showed up to Capitol. It was supposed to be a 2-month job. Worked on this record, they gave me this huge office at Capitol where this woman before me had been, and really was kind of stumbling and finding my way and working on this soundtrack. But because Capitol had a first look deal with Miramax, these movies were all lined up. So the short story is I turned that job into a 2-year contract, and I became the director of soundtracks for Capitol Records.
Fantastic.
And that was when soundtracks were booming.
Yeah.
So,
but you created that position.
The position existed before, but that team had left, and they really just wanted someone to come in and do Scream. And I thought, I kind of like this. I'm gonna keep going, and I'm gonna start to know everybody and talk to everyone, and I'm the person to come to. Come to me. I will figure it out. I will put the rest of the Capitol music artists in movies with my other friends that were supervising. In that position, when I came in and they were doing Romeo and Juliet, we did Boogie Nights, Good Will Hunting, There's Something About Mary, Never Been Kissed, on and on and on, all these soundtracks, because that was the time when everybody wanted to bid on a soundtrack, and we had this kind of automatic funneling system with Miramax at the time, so we got to do all their films.
Nice.
And the other thing I got to do is pitch our music to the me's of the world, to the studio. So now I start learning all these other people who are music executives at 20th Century Fox, at Sony, at Warner Brothers, also independent music supervisors, which I didn't really have a knowledge of at the time, but they kind of just started popping up. And then I started getting phone calls, I'm doing this film, can I use the Foo Fighters, or can I use Supergrass, or can I, who all these big bands we had at the time. So I stayed there for 2 years and kind of, got into that culture. And we had mastering and studios down below at Capitol Records. So I sat with the mastering guy when we were mastering our soundtracks. Sat with him, learned how that happened. Got to go to this, the sessions downstairs. Walking into Capitol Records.
What history.
What history.
Yeah.
Every day I was so grateful to walk into that building. And I always feel very sort of, honored to have been there at that time and also been in that building. You can't walk into a more prestigious and student history.
Scream of Sinatra and all these.
Nat King Cole,
absolutely.
Beatles, yeah.
So you're doing this now, so is there a certain amount of listening to music that you've got to be a part of the balance of what you're doing?
Well, what I really needed to know was the capital artist.
Right.
Because let's say we picked up a movie from Fox. My job was to get as much capital, tracks and music into that soundtrack. Right. That's another conversation about how that really happens.
You want to take the most real estate from that.
Of course.
Yeah.
I want to get the most real estate for capital because obviously we're putting out the record and they paid attention. So my job at that point was to really know all the artists, some of the catalog, and depending on the album or the soundtrack we were doing, and then everything new that was coming up, which was really fun because I worked on the A&R floor, and all the A&R guys and girls would come in my office and say, oh, here's a new thing, can you put this in a movie? Can you get this in a movie? I was kind of like the one to go to because everybody wanted, some real estate on some of those films and soundtracks.
So what would you say, is there any project that stands out that was one of the most challenging that you had, that was really difficult that you had to...
At that point?
Yeah, at that point, yeah.
I don't know if it was so much challenging as, it was kind of fun at that time. It was a fun atmosphere. Record labels were fun. And we were on the radio. All the artists were on the radio. Yeah. So, one of my favorite albums was There's Something About Mary. Yeah. That was a really fun project to work on.
Yeah.
So there probably were challenging ones. I don't remember them as much as the ones we had a good time with, because the culture at the time was different.
Right. So, we know this music industry has changed dramatically. We'll talk more about that later on as far as how it has changed. But so from this point on now, where did this lead you to?
So from there, I wound up doing a lot of 20th Century Fox movies. And one day I got a call from someone at Fox that said, we want to hire you to be the vice president of music at 20th Century Fox. We want you to come over here and manage on the studio side. And I was like, okay. This literally, I didn't have to interview for this job. They knew me because I'd been working with them for 2 years. Yeah. It was a very natural transition. It was a very big promotion for me. I walked into 20th Century Fox as a vice president. I didn't know what pre-production was. I didn't know what production was. I didn't know what post-production was. And
I love it.
It's like fake it till you make it.
Absolutely.
I don't think I slept for 2 months when I was figuring it out. And the very first day I got there, the girl that hired me, who was really my mentor and taught me a lot, her name was Laura Wasserman. She was doing that job before. She walked me into a meeting and said, this is your movie, and shut the door and walked out. And here I was with the director and the producer and the head of post-production. It was a Fox Searchlight movie, and I had no idea what I was doing. But I figured it out. Baptism by fire.
Absolutely.
I knew how that music went into a film. I knew how to put the soundtrack together, but I didn't know the stuff that led up to that. Fox had a very big music department. Robert Kraft was the head of music, and we had 3 music executives at the time. So there were 3 of me, right? And we managed music on Big Fox, Fox 2000, Fox Searchlight, and Fox Animation. So I could be doing 8 movies at a time, managing all 8 movies at a time. So what that meant is on my music intensive film. Yeah, so
at the highest level.
Yes. And my other 2 counterparts were also working on 8 movies at once. But the way we helped manage that is we would hire music supervisors, independent music people that would be in the cutting room, that would be our eyes and ears, that would tell me what was going on every day. They were our partners, but they reported into me, and we worked as a team together. So that's how, when I started working with independent music supervisors as the music executive on these films.
You have won many awards and recognition of what you've done. You really have built this machine of just sheer talent behind the scenes of making this work. Where do you think that came from?
I have to go back to my gymnastics career. Athletes, the drive I hate to say the drive to be perfect, because that's like you learn in therapy that you can't be perfect.
Right.
And perfection is something not to strive for. But the drive that comes before that, and the desire to do really well, to perform, to be successful, like I had all that in me, and the passion for music. That's what drove it up. It's so exciting doing what we do. Yes, there's all this chaos and drama, but the big picture is we get to put music in movies for a living. Yeah. We didn't know that was a job when we were younger. Nobody told you that's something you could do. Right. I sort of, as you see, I've sort of stumbled. I stumbled on it, but in every job that I did, I just owned it. I decided I'm here, I'm gonna make this my position, and I'm gonna figure it out. And I'm gonna do it to the best of my ability.
Fantastic. You say you stumbled.
Yeah.
I believe there's a certain level of fate here.
Possibly, yes.
I
A
believe
little
so,
bit of luck,
because,
yes.
Well, and luck is something you really earn in time. It's hard work is what produces luck. You obviously have put the hard work into it, and you put this ability of being able to learn fast. That's something
Yes.
which maybe the disciplines of being a gymnast, as there are disciplines in the music industry. Those disciplines sometimes internally, but that had to come from someplace in your past or your family that has a certain drive in you that allows you to want to push yourself further, even though you don't know where you're going.
Right.
I believe you
Right.
you just go.
You just go. You just go. You keep going.
So where do you think that came from?
Yeah, my dad, very Midwest, he always instilled the work ethic, respecting the people that came before you, learning, listening and learning, and always doing your best. Always do your best, always do your best. I think it was my Midwest father that really instilled that in me.
How beautiful. With what you're working on now, you're working with different people as music supervisors now, working on projects?
Yes, so not every movie would have a music supervisor because some were score in one song or score in two songs. But some of the more intensive music projects, we would hire a music supervisor. The director would say, I worked with such and such, I'd like that person, or we'd do a round of interviews. And that's how I started to work with music supervisors. And that's the only way you could really manage those projects. I couldn't be in 8 cutting rooms at once, and I had a responsibility to the studio. So my job was a little more political. Yes, it was musical, but it was more about managing the politics, making sure, the bosses up there knew everything was happening. We were going to have a hit record. We were going to have a great movie. It was more kind of the politics of managing up as well as doing the music, but not as creative as the people sitting in the cutting room pitching, 100 songs for one spot. I could pitch 5 songs for one spot. They were pitching 100 a day, So a little different balance there.
But those are strong management skills.
Yes.
That you really have to learn fast.
Yes. Yes, so invaluable. I'm so glad I grew up at Fox.
Yeah.
I really grew up at the studio in the business.
So
Learned how to handle myself in a big room, how to be vocal, get your point across, but don't say too much. There's negotiation, calling people, telling them you don't have money for certain things or you didn't get the job, all those skills of letting people down easy, giving good news as well as bad news. Learn that at the studio.
That is invaluable.
Yes.
Really, really invaluable.
Yes.
Where to next now? Where did this lead you to?
So after that job, I got a couple more steps before I came independent.
Okay.
After that job, I went back to a company called EMI Music Marketing, which Phil Corderero at that time had started, and he, it sounded like a really big job at the time. I went back to be the head of soundtracks for all the labels in the EMI family. So not just Capitol, Virgin, Priority, Blue Note, S-Curve. Like it was a big job. Took that job. What wound up happening during that year I did that was that everyone got afraid of soundtracks. Oh no, we don't want to spend $1 million on a soundtrack advance, which is what we were getting at Fox.
Wow.
A $500,000 was like a low advance. $1 million was more on the normal end. Everyone kind of got gun shy, and I was just kind of twiddling my thumbs, and I was like, I'm not really doing anything that I wanted to do here. I still wanted to be involved in the creative process like I was at Capitol. Different time. So when I was there, I got a call from MGM, from the head of music at MGM saying, will you come back to the studio side? So I asked my bosses at EMM if I could be let out of my deal. I went back to the studio, and I was the senior vice president of music at MGM. And the difference was where Fox I was working at 8 movies at once, MGM made 5 movies a year. So I doubled my salary. It was a much easier job.
Yeah.
I loved it. I mean, it was just walking back into the same shoes.
Beautiful.
Smaller department, smaller studio, great movies. And I just kind of eased right back in.
And creative.
And creative again. Yeah, I was working on the films again, and whether there was a soundtrack or not, I still got to work on the movies and the scoring side and the song side and all of the things I love to do.
And what movies were happening at that time? What were you working on?
Be Cool was a big movie that brought John Travolta back.
Yeah.
The Pink Panther with Beyonce. She was in the Pink Panther.
And you were there for how long?
I was only there about 1.5 years, and then MGM came to us and said, we're not going to make movies anymore. We're going to pay all of you out of your deal. The entire music department, you're going away. So I probably would have still been there. So I'm grateful that happened because my life took a different turn, but paid us out of our deal. Even my assistant got 6 months pay. Like they really took care of us.
Beautiful.
And I went home and I thought, okay, I need to look for a job at another studio because that's what I do. kind of like redecorated my backyard. I was sort of like, what am I going to do? Where's a job opening going to happen? And I got a call from one of my best friends who used to be a music supervisor who I used to hire, and he was the senior vice president of music at Warner Brothers now. And he said, do you want to music supervise a movie? And I thought, by myself? Oh my gosh, independently? Okay, sure. And that movie was ATL, and it was his first job at the studio and my first job as an independent. His name is Darren Higman. He's still one of my dearest friends. And we did it together. And that was the first movie I music supervised. I called my assistant from MGM and said, come back, I'm hiring you. There were 56 hip hop songs in that movie. It's crazy.
That is amazing.
But we did it. I did a great job for Warner Brothers, and then during that movie they said, oh, we have another movie called August Rush. Would you music supervise August Rush? It's all about music. A little boy named Freddie Highmore, who's this like music savant, and he hears music in New York and in the street sewers, and he hears it in the trees, and I music supervised that movie next. And then Fox went, wait, you're music supervising? Oh, I'm gonna hire Julia because she knows everyone that works here. She knows all the departments. She used to work here. So then I started getting hired at Fox. So because I had this background, because I was in-house, and I had relationships, that's sort of what started my job as an independent music supervisor.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Again, sort of didn't expect it, said yes, started to really enjoy being independent, but yet having big studio movies to work on. Yeah. Which is kind of hard when you say you want to be a supervisor. I just had those relationships and I had done those jobs. And I was like, oh, I'm starting to make a living out here. It's kind of fun.
When you think about how the music industry has changed, and it has changed and it continues to change.
Yes.
Not even daily, it's changing by the minute. It really is amazing. Yep. You've had to adapt to this all, and now by being independent of what you're doing, you really have given yourself some flexibility, but the value that you have that you bring to the table is really incredible. What motivates you?
That's a really good question, because what motivated me before I had my son, who's now 11, and what motivates me now is different. Sharing my love of music and my passion of music with my son is something on a daily basis I do with him, and I don't take it for granted. And getting to do movies that he gets to see now, like all the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies, he's read all the books. You know, Trolls, which he saw me work on for 2 years, all the Pitch Perfect movies that he gets to, like, I have to say, in this today, at this moment, my son and his love for music and love for what I do motivates me. I love to share it with him. And also, you know, I have to make a living. Yeah. But I think it's my passion for what I do. I love these bigger musical films. I've kind of not fallen into, but sort of been asked to do, some with Julianne Jordan, who I know you've talked to.
Yes.
We have this really neat little niche now where we're getting hired on some of these bigger musicals, and I love that. I mean, I grew up going to musicals, and I'm from Chicago. We took advantage of the theater, and that's a big love for me, kind of the way that my career has gone now.
Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. You know, what you're doing is unique in its way, but you etched this out for yourself. You kind of, you know, again, with that machete in that jungle, you created a path that was not there before. In closing, now imagine, we've got these people that are watching this that never even understood a position that you've been talking about now.
Yes.
And all of a sudden their eyes are opened up to that might be something they might love doing. And this might not be showcased at a university. This might not be learned in a formal academic situation. What would you say to them that could give them the hope and the path? What qualities do they need to succeed at what they may want to do?
There's a lot of peripheral qualities, but I think the core qualities are resilience, resourcefulness is a big one, and respect. It's like 3 R's. But when you're coming into this business, you want to do something that people before you have done. You really need to listen and learn, because people like me want to pass it down.
Yeah.
I feel like that's my responsibility. I'm a big advocate for mentorship. I've made so many mistakes. I've been doing it a long time. I love to pass it down. And if those people listen and observe, ask questions, but be resourceful and just be present, you're going to learn. You're going to learn so much, then you're going to get to decide what path you want to go on. It's one thing to have the talent and be musical and be creative and smart, but there's so many other things that separates the successful people for the people that are kind of living in their creativity and not making a living to making a living. So I really think those are some good qualities to think about.
That is fantastic. You impressed me as one of the best cheerleaders that we have in the music
exactly.
industry. The cheerleading skills are still going through. You have been fantastic. Thank you so much
Thank
on
you.
behalf of
My
the sessions.
pleasure.
Julia, you're a gem.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.